And I saw some fabulous familiar faces. Carrie showed up on my screen. I was like, oh my God, there's Carrie. So good to see you. Um, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mara Brenner, and I am a child psychotherapist by training. And I've been in the early childhood field for almost 40 years and have worked in special education. I have had a private practice. I have taught in higher ed. And here in New Mexico, for those of you who know me, might know me through my role as a training and development consultant for the Birth to Five world across the state. I've done some work with a significant amount of work with our state-funded home visiting program. And I also have done some work with our FIT early intervention program. So I'm thrilled to be here with you all. I am also a consultant for the Pyramid Model Consortium, which is a training for preventing challenging behaviors and supporting social emotional development. So conversations around behavior and understanding behavior is something that I feel like I could talk about all the time. So we only have about an hour and a half together, and so I'm going to do my best. And I'm going to talk slowly for the interpreters, but I'm going to try to cover content to make this time meaningful for you all. So having said that first part, I want to make sure that this time is valuable. So please take notes as makes sense for you and however you learn. Also, the content I'm going to be talking about is really application-based content. And so I want you to think about a family or two that you're currently working with where the caregiver might be struggling with their child's behavior so that you can put the pieces together. And then finally, just jot down your questions as they come up so that we can address them at the end. There'll be some reflection throughout, but I want to make sure that your questions get answered. So if your brain works like mine, you may forget them. So jot them down and we'll have time to talk about them at the end. This is what I'm hoping to cover. I want us all to have an understanding of what behavior is and how we all make meaning out of behavior that's specific to who we are. I'll briefly talk about some of Freiberg's Ghosts in the Nursery so that we can understand the meaning making of caregivers who've experienced trauma, as well as our own meaning making that is based on our own potential trauma. I have a couple activities related to temperament that we're not going to do, but I want to show you in case that may be helpful in your work with families. And then I want to end with a discussion of how we as home visitors hold space for caregivers as they shift their perspective to be able to read the cues of their children. I mean, the goal in home visiting is to support the parent-child or caregiver-child relationship. And so it's ultimately 100% about being able to read their cues. And so let's move forward and talk about it. So first off, and maybe most importantly, I want to make sure everyone understands that behavior is communication, period. Behavior is communication, period. We as adults are the ones that label behavior good or bad, but in fact, behavior is just communication, right? A toddler hits another child over the head and grabs their toy. Some adults interpret that as the child being aggressive. From the lens of understanding the behavior is communication, we actually understand that that child is just trying to get the toy and lacks the skill to be able to do it differently. I am not saying that we're encouraging hitting or encouraging grabbing. However, I am encouraging us as adults in the as the adults in children's lives to understand what their behavior is telling us. A 10-month-old bites another child. That child is not being mean or intentionally hurtful. They're communicating that they want something. Maybe attention of the other child. I don't know, maybe the attention of the adult who is with that child. Or maybe they're communicating that they want the other child to stop doing whatever they're doing. Our job as the adult in children's lives is to understand what they are communicating with their behavior so that we can stay attuned and help them to get their needs met. Now, I want to be really clear about this idea of helping young children get their needs met. I'm talking about it from a social emotional lens. And in that way, I mean, get their needs met in terms of reassurance, help to regulate, help to tolerate disappointment. I am not talking about helping them get their needs met in terms of the wanting another piece of candy or wanting to stay up a little bit later. So the want is different than the unmet or the emotional need. All behavior has meaning. This is not just a child thing, right? You all are communicating to me now. Your nods are communicating agreement. You're writing things down as communicating that there's something important that you want to remember. Your yawns are communicating that you're tired. Behavior is communication regardless of your age. And for young children, behavior is their way of expressing their needs, wants, and feelings before they have the skills and abilities to manage their feelings or express them with words. Adults interpret behavior, label the behavior, or understand the behavior based on our past experiences, the way our parents raised us, our community's expectations of behavior, our culture's expectation of behaviors. 3 adults can interpret one child's behavior in 3 different ways. I used to teach for people who are in Albuquerque. I used to teach at CNM. I used to teach child development, and often I would tell my students that when they see a child's behavior, they need to ask themselves, what is the behavior communicating 3 times? Because the first time we ask, what is the behavior communicating? It is usually about us. It is the meaning we make based on our own experiences. The second time we ask it, it's usually something we've been taught. And the third time we ask ourselves that question, usually we get to what this particular child is actually communicating. In order to fully understand behavior, it's essential for us to understand development. Some very typically developmentally appropriate behavior is really difficult. However, if one doesn't understand development, one can interpret it as problematic, even pathological. Or on the other hand, one could make meaning out of the behavior to relate to what it means to being a parent, right? So it could be, if my child is having a tantrum, I must be a bad parent. So typical development behavior for some age ranges and for some people is just hard to be around, but it is not challenging behavior in and of itself. And so what's really important when we're helping families be able to interpret their child's behavior is to be able to distinguish, is this in fact challenging behavior, or is this in fact behavior that is just challenging for me? And then what is our role in terms of helping a family be able to see things a little bit different? So for many families, parents and caregivers, I'm going to use those 2 words interchangeably. And so if I miss it one time, please know I mean parent, caregiver. For some parents or caregivers, a child saying no is totally unacceptable. It's a sign of being rude and disrespectful. For other parents and caregivers, children having tantrums or big feelings is unacceptable because they should just do what they're told. Again, developmentally typical behavior is not challenging behavior. It's just often challenging for us. So I want to just take this example of a child having a tantrum. Okay. All a tantrum is saying from a behaviorist communication lens is, my feelings are too big for me to manage right now. That is what a tantrum is telling us. We as adults say things like they're trying to manipulate us. They're trying to make us give them what they want. Now, I say this all the time. Manipulation gets a bad rap because what manipulation actually is trying to get our needs met. I used this story when I was not a young child, but older. I actually knew that if I wanted to get money from my parents, that I would not ask my mother for money. I would ask my father for money because my mother would always say no, and my father would always say yes. And so in some ways, some people would say I was manipulating them. What I was doing was trying to get my needs met. People will often say that about 2-year-olds and tantrums. And so for me, I want that perspective to be to shift, to understand that all a tantrum is saying is my feelings are too big for me to manage right now. You told me no, and I can't tolerate it. And so our role at that point is to attend to the unmet need, which is the emotional need of how hard it is to not get what you want, how to deal with frustration. That's different than saying, okay, here you go, here's another piece of candy. If we give them another piece of candy every time they throw a tantrum, all they've learned is if I throw a tantrum, they'll give me a piece of candy. That is not pathological on the child's part. That is just learned behavior based on the adult's response. But a tantrum in and of itself is just communicating that my feelings are too big for me to manage. We all have belief systems about behavior. We come with our own biases based on our past experiences. Culture is foundational to caregiving beliefs, assumptions, values, and behaviors. This is just a fact. It is not realistic for any of us to say that we're not impacted by our past experiences. We just are. Having our own biases is not the problem. Not realizing that we have them is the problem. So if there's anybody in this room that says, I never judge the families I work with, I'm going to ask you to ask yourself again. All judgment is, I think judgment also, people make an assumption that that is something negative. Judgment is really just having an opinion about a situation. If you were to say, oh, that mom is great, that's a judgment. That's your opinion, right? That mom is struggling is your opinion about it. The truth is that relationships cut us to the core. The opinions we have of others, the feelings that come up for us due to others' behaviors in our relationships is just human. Now, I've been around the block for a very long time, and it is not uncommon for me to hear things like, I can't believe that staff person just acted that way. Or for a provider to say, I can't believe that parent just did that. Or to hear a parent say, I can't believe my child is doing that. So behavior is behavior, whether we're talking about a 2-month-old, a 2-year-old, a 20-year-old, or a 40-year-old. And we all have beliefs and assumptions about behavior. I also think I think we tend to have unrealistic expectations of young children, but I think we also have unrealistic expectations of adults too. Most adults assume that adults know better. And the truth is that not all adults know better. They just know what they know based on their past experiences. And if we are a person who we think we know better, we have an opinion about the other who is doing it differently than we want. It's phrases like, she doesn't like me. That's based on a belief system. It's our interpretation of the behavior. He thinks he's smarter than me. They're purposefully leaving me out. My baby doesn't love me. My partner doesn't care about me or the baby. Those last ones are are some of the phrases we might hear from caregivers that we work with. And our role is to hold space for that statement to be made, but to wonder, to be curious with families about why they think that. We had a conversation last week when we met where we were talking about my baby doesn't love me, and somebody was commenting on it. Well, of course, all babies love their moms or love their caregivers. If we were to respond to a caregiver with, of course, all babies love their moms, we've missed the opportunity to find out what that mom meant, right? We have totally told her that I'm not listening to you. Now, I think we think we're being helpful, but we've missed the mark. Mom says, I feel like my baby doesn't love me. Oh my gosh, that's tough. What makes you think your baby doesn't love you? Well, she does this, 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 and this. Oh, I can see where you might think that. Yeah, that's tough. You know what I know about babies and relationships? That's when we can share our information, but not until we have found out where the meaning making comes from. So I'm going to just give a really small example that has nothing to do with home visiting, but has something to do with how our belief systems and our the way in which our past experiences have impacted us showed up for me. So some of you know, I used to live back east. I lived in Boston. I worked in a therapeutic preschool. I had children who had severe psychiatric, emotional, neurological issues. So behavior issues were not a big deal. Part of my regular life. I had this little 3-year-old boy whose name is Jake, and he was like this big, right? He was like really little 3-year-old. And I, every day I would scaffold for him how to get his backpack on, right? You know, put your arm in and put your other arm in. I could literally spend 15 minutes trying to get this little boy to get his backpack on. And my coworker who worked with the older kids said to me, you know, Mara, you could hold the backpack for him. And I was like, no, he needs to learn how to put a backpack on himself. And she's like, Mara, the backpack is as big as he is and weighs more than he is. And I was like, but he needs to learn how to do it. And I'm going to tell you, it was like my brain exploded. It never entered my mind to do it for him. And what I know, many years later, my father said this to me, that I'm one of 3 girls. My father said, the way in which I raised you was to have 3 very strong, independent women. And I did not realize how that showed up in my work. I was going to make that kid carry his backpack because he needed to carry his backpack. It is a very benign example, but I want you to see how it shows up. The meaning we make, the expectations we have based on our upbringing matters. Are people with me? People good? Okay. I see some faces on the screen, so I just want to make sure. All right. What happens to us when we are presented with challenging behaviors is that we lose our minds. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain in a moment, but the point that I want to make with this is that when we are presented with our child's challenging behavior, our work is to be responsive versus reactive. And so some of you may know Dan Siegel's work, but if all of you wouldn't mind doing this with me, let's just do the hand model. So just put your hand up and fold your thumb in like you're doing the number 4, and then fold your fingers over your thumb. And so Dan Siegel would say, this is your brain. And I'm going to do this very simplistically, right? Like your wrist is your brain stem. The thumb part here is your hippocampus or your amygdala, which is the emotional part of your brain. And then your fingers that are folded over are your frontal cortex, which is your thinking part of your brain, your judgment, your executive function. And what he would say is when our buttons are pushed, Children do that thing that bothers us. Our coworkers do that thing that bother us. The families do those things that bother us. We actually flip our lids. And when we flip our lids, we are literally functioning from this part of our brain. And if you remember, hippocampus and amygdala are our emotional brains. So we are doing and saying things from a reactive standpoint versus a thoughtful one. Now, if there's anybody in the room that says that never happens to me, I'm going to ask you to think about it again. I'm going to ask you, this is that thing if anybody's got a partner, right? Like where you flip your lid and you say things you regret, right? Anybody has siblings that you've got stuff with, right? You've got in-laws, any of it. Any relationship where a behavior triggers you. And so the goal in understanding this is that it's important for us to know that when we are presented with behaviors that are challenging for us, we have literally stopped using the part of our thinking brain. And I say this to you as providers for when you flip your lid because the parent or caregiver does or says that thing that you can't believe they just said. Also for you to have that information when parents say, I can't believe my child just did this, and this is what I do or say. So the goal of when we have recognized that we have flipped our lids is to engage in an activity that gets us back to our frontal cortex, into our thinking brain. Now, the majority of people will say, I take 10 deep breaths, which is a lovely strategy to regulate your nervous system. But what I want you to be thinking about as providers and supporters of caregivers is how can you shift your thinking about the behavior? Because then you're in your thinking brain, not just your nervous system. And how I think of it is I use two reframes all the time. This person is struggling, or this person is struggling, or this person is suffering. And I will use that for a child, a 4-month-old, 4-year-old, or a 40-year-old. Because when I think that person is struggling, I drop into my heart immediately. And I think, how can I be of support? So it helps me to lean in versus lean out. Okay. The reframe is not the solution. It's not what you're going to do. The reframe is what you do to shift your mind so that what you do or say is actually helpful versus reactive. And also, I mean, some of you who know Dan Siegel's work know that he teaches parents about flipping their lid. So it's something for you to think about in your repertoire of support to families. Would that be something that would be helpful for a family to know? He also does that with teenagers too. I'm not so sure how it would work with our age range, but it really is helpful to have an understanding. For those of you who know me, know that the goal, I believe, of our work as supporters, as providers, as home visitors, is to make sure we operate from a place of self-awareness. And that's where I want parents and caregivers to come from too. For those of you who remember the parallel process, we are with families the way we want families to be with their babies. So, for us to be able to meet the needs of young children, we need to be able to reflect on their behavior versus react to it. So these are 3 questions that I use regularly with providers, and then use it with educators and with caregivers. We need to ask ourselves, what is the behavior telling us? And by telling, most people, this is my experience. I do a lot of work with pre-K teachers. So what is the behavior telling us? That this child is lazy is a response, right? So remember when I told you to ask that question 3 times? Because that meaning making is about that person. That when they see that behavior, they think that means they're lazy. Now, I am a person who has a learning disability. I was called lazy all the way through school. I will tell you, I was far from lazy. I was working harder than most people to be able to make sense of things. That interpretation of lazy was about how my teachers perceived things. That wasn't about me, right? So what is the behavior telling us? What is the unmet need? And the unmet need is not another piece of candy or to stay up 10 minutes longer or to stay outside longer. The unmet need is something emotional. I need some co-regulation. I need some reassurance. I need some connection. And then the third question is, why do I feel so reactive to this? Now, some of you know I do work not only with providers, I do a lot of work around leadership too. So these questions are relevant whether you are a supervisor, a leader. You ask these questions of yourself, of your staff. For you as providers, I want you to ask yourself these questions of yourself and your colleagues, right? Why is that colleague behaving that way? What is their unmet need at that point? And how do we share that information with families so that parents and caregivers can have that same lens? All right, so I'm going to show you a few videos. And so if you don't already have paper and pen out, go ahead and grab that, because I just want you to make note of what comes up for you when you watch these videos. Okay. And so the first one, I just want you to try to make meaning out of the behavior. So this child does some biting, and I just want you to make note of what the biting is trying to tell us. Okay. Maya, you're on my screen, so will you tell me if you can hear the audio? All right, so either drop in the chat or unmute and tell me what the biting was communicating. Actually, unmuting might be easier because I don't have, poor Maya has to do the chat. Olga?
I was just saying I wasn't able to see the video at all.
Oh, no. Were others able to see the video?
Yes.
I could see it.
Okay, oh, I'm sorry, Olga. What do people think the biting, if you were able to see the video, what do you think the biting was communicating?
I think he wanted to make sure that he knows that that toy is his, because after trying to bite, he said mine and like taking it away from him. And
Okay.
then so when the other one and the second part, like the other child approached him, he tried to bite again to make sure that, hey, no, don't touch it, it's mine.
Okay, so you think the biting is communicating that that's my toy?
Yes.
Okay, great. Blanca?
Buenas tardes. Sí, yo lo que aprecié de la mordedura es que el niño quiso decir con no palabras que ese juguete le pertenecía a él y por eso lo mordió. Entonces, él sin palabras dijo, este juguete es mío y te voy a morder para que me lo regreses.
Yes, so you got it, right? So we get like, he doesn't have another skill right now, and so he's using behavior to get his message across, okay? So we've got two people saying, I wanted that it was communicating, I want the toy, or that toy is mine. Anybody have anything different?
Some of the comments in the chat are that he was experiencing frustration. He wants the toy. He's not being heard. Frustration wanting the toy, not understanding about sharing.
Okay. Okay.
This is mine, ownership over the toy. The child couldn't use his voice, so what he knows was to bite the child.
Right. Right. So this is an easier example of being able to understand because it's a snapshot, right? And we can just, it's like a 20-second snapshot of a child biting, but it shows the understanding, the being able to use that lens of understanding what the behavior is communicating. All right, so I'm going to show you a couple other videos, and I want you to, I want you to just write down what comes up for you. This one is less about the meaning of the behavior. I mean, you may want to write that too, but I want you to take note of your reaction to what you see, okay? Maya, same thing. I'm going to make sure you can hear it.
Kyle! Give me a sec. What? A whip transaction. Huh? It's a whip transaction.
Are you really gonna act like a silver toy? Really? We're gonna watch this in front of everybody when we get home.
No!
Yes, we are.
No! No, I don't want to go home. I don't want to go home. I don't want to go home. I want to die. 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 I want to die.
Okay, so just take a moment and write down, what did you notice about yourself as you watched this? Any other thoughts that came up? And then you're welcome to unmute and share or drop it in the chat and Maya will tell us. So what did you notice about yourself as you watched this? What were your thoughts? I'm going to say some thoughts, and because some of them you may not want to say out loud. All right. And so this is an example of us having a reaction based on our experiences and then being able to shift, right? So I'm going to guess that a majority of you were saying, oh my gosh, I want this child to shut up, right? Like there's some like, oh my God, this is screaming. Not everybody. I'm just saying some of you might have, right? Some of you might have thought, oh my gosh, I want this mother to respond to this child differently. Right? This mom is saying things like, we're going to watch this video in front of others. And you might be thinking, oh my God, what kind of mom does or says that? Right? Melissa has her hand up, and then Camarina.
Hi. I feel like I felt so frustrated with this mom. I was really annoyed because he was looking for someone to organize his feelings a little bit and nobody was there.
Security there, yes.
Yeah, he was just ignored and like I can only imagine how scary that was for him to be frustrated and all he has is a camera in his face instead of his mom or caregiver to comfort him through it. So it was very frustrating for me to watch.
Hard to watch. Yes, yes. And so if that's the mom that you're working with, how do you support that mom?
I think for me, we would be doing circle of security and we'd be kind of talking about like that organizing the feeling and how she can be with him and then maybe even exploring why it might have been uncomfortable for her to be with him in that.
Yes,
feeling.
okay. And so I don't know if everybody knows Circle of Security or not, but it's a way of helping caregivers understand their child's behavior. Yeah. Camarina, and then, oh, hi, Anna. Hi, Anna. Camarina?
So realistically, my first thought in the past, before my own kids and working on early intervention, will be like you said, like, listen to your kid, stop him, the crying. Now that I early interventionist and I have a child with a disability, it will be like understanding.
Mhm.
If, like he wants a toy, I know as a parent, if this was my family, I will discuss with the mom, negotiating with the child. Acknowledge the feelings and emotions. I know you want the toy, and then negotiate with the child, because I know not all the time parents can access everything that their child wants. And it's not always appropriate to give them everything they want. Just practice with the mom and find ways for her to negotiate okay, and always acknowledge the feelings and emotions. I know you're having these big feelings because you want the toy, but at this time, we can't get the toy. Let's go home and play together, but acknowledge the feeling. I think the child was getting more frustrated because instead of mom saying, I understand, I mean, she was more like ashamed, making fun of him and making him ashamed, or like, throwing gasoline to the fire because she was ignoring him.
And so, absolutely. And so again, I'm going to pose the same question. It's not just for you, Camarina. It's like, and so how do you think this mom would have been open to that kind of support? Right. And we don't know because it's a video. Right. And so part of what I want you to think about is, how do you have that conversation? Do you tell a parent, this is what you should do? Do you model it so that, Camarina, hang on a second. Do you model what to do, or do you ask reflective questions so that you know where the parent is, right? And so I'm going to cheat for you and tell you it's the last one, right? Because it is a waste of our energy to tell somebody to do something that they're not ready to do, right?
Well,
our desire is to help a parent in the moment to do it differently. But in order for them to do it differently, we need to understand where they're starting. Okay, Camarina, go ahead.
But also I think I will approach it in the way that how going to the store and having these types of behaviors with a kid make you feel. I will start there, because if mom says, this is very frustrating for me and it impacts me emotionally, if I approach mom and says, well, if it doesn't make you feel comfortable, would you be open to try different things? I will approach it that way, because I'm not only going to tell the mom, this is what you need to do, because like you said, she might not be ready. But if I approach it in the way that how it makes you feel, and would you like to continue having these behaviors, or would you like to find ways to make it better for you every time you go to the store, then I feel that she will be more open to have a different approach.
Absolutely. You got to start by joining with a caregiver to find out if they are open and ready, and how one of you does that will be different than the other one of you, right? It might be different for each family you work with. Anna, did you want to add something?
Hi, yeah. Hi, everybody. Hi, Mara. Well, that, the emotions, what I've noticed about myself, was heartbreaking for the kid, but also for the parent, because they're both, needed hands, but there was no hands for them both. So this is where, talking, circle language, where are they on the bottom, on the circle? And what are their hands? So there's that empathy, that compassion. And then for this mom, probably one thing that I would probably do is just do a little bit of role modeling. Maybe like, oh, that must be really hard. Yeah, it's really hard. Just like acknowledging the emotions for both with that perhaps simple question, acknowledging both parent-child emotions, and because they both are dysregulated, and then perhaps in a visit later on, then exploring, like a little bit more of where the mom is coming from, maybe her experiences growing up.
Yes.
where those triggers come when her kid does that. We get more
Absolutely.
information later on, but in that moment, maybe what I would do is has this mom's home visitor or a friend or just a random stranger at the store, just like, oh yeah, that must be really hard.
Yeah. I particularly, I like all of what you said, Anna, but neither of them had hands. And so as home visitors, we are the hands for parents, right? Now, I don't know the story behind this video. I was a little mortified that I could find this on the internet and that it was just there, right? And I'm gonna make meaning to make me feel better that she was taking the video on purpose to show to somebody to get some help, right? I'm gonna go with that because that will make me feel better. But also maybe this mom's past experiences were really punitive, and so she was trying to restrain from being punitive with her child, right? This is why it's essential to find out the meaning that the parent is making about this. What were your experiences about this in the past? What voices do you have in your head telling you to do this or this? Because this might be her doing better than was done for her. I don't know. We don't know until we ask. Yeah. Elsa, and then I'm going to keep us moving along.
I just wanted to say that I feel like there's different perspectives when this happens, because I feel seeing that I feel sorry for both of them, and at the same time, like if I'm in that position, I have my feelings are a whole different way. If my grandkids or something is happening, I feel a whole different way than I do when I see something like that happen. And so
Yes.
a lot of the times it's hard to put yourself in that position for other people that to look and they don't have that situation happen. It does make you feel a different way.
Yes.
And so that's just kind of what I wanted to say. And to me, I feel like she was maybe doing that because he's kind of embarrassing her, and she's trying to tell him like, you're embarrassing me, I'm embarrassing you now. This is what's going to happen, and I don't know if that's the
Very
truth, but I
mature,
feel like
right?
he was kind of,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. One of the, I think it's so interesting, right? Like we are professionals, and I think Camarina spoke to this. It's like before I would have acted this way. Now that I know, I would act this way. But the majority of us, if it's our own child, we're still gonna act differently, right? Because we're triggered by it, right? And so this is the human piece of it. Yeah. All right, I'm going to zip through some things. I'm not going to do these videos because I feel like you get the point. But I am going to do this one. And part of what we've been talking about is just the basic meaning we make out of behavior based on our experiences. And for caregivers who've experienced trauma, they have their own lens that for some of us, we may not understand. So I'm just going to play this video and then we'll talk about it on the other end.
The concept of ghosts in the nursery was developed in 1975 by Selma Freiberg, a psychoanalyst and an early pioneer of infant mental health. We all have heard stories about ghosts that continue to haunt until their stories are heard. Similarly, Freiberg uses the term ghost to describe how our unprocessed traumatic childhood experiences with our parents may influence how we bond, care for, and parent our own babies. Specifically, Freiberg noted that parents who were neglected, abused, or traumatized as children may unknowingly inflict the same pattern of behaviors on their own. But of course, not all traumatized parents repeat the neglect and abuse they endured at youth. So, the question becomes, what summons the ghosts in the nursery? Why are some parents able to quickly recognize the presence of their ghosts of the past and banish them accordingly? But why do others get possessed by ghosts generation after generation? In her seminal article, Freiberg described a clinical case of a patient named Mary. Shortly after Mary was born, her mother suffered postpartum psychosis and attempted suicide. Mary's mom was placed in a psychiatric hospital for an extended period of time and was unable to care for Mary. Mary's dad was also in and out of jail. Mary experienced neglect when she was an infant, as she moved from one place to another to live with different relatives. When Mary became older and became a mom, she struggled to provide care for her baby. By the time Mary was referred to Freiburg Mental Health Clinic, the baby was already showing signs of difficulty bonding with his mom. During home visit appointments, the therapist noticed how Mary would frequently leave her baby by himself and not respond to her baby's cries. Even when the therapist asked Mary how she comforted her baby, Mary could not answer. Freiburg stated, "It is almost as if the mother did not hear her baby's cries." In a way, maternal instincts that come easily to most mothers was a challenging exercise for Mary, and she inadvertently repeated a similar pattern of neglect she experienced as a child. So, what causes Mary to repeat her past with her current child? Freiburg stated that parents recreate their past when they cannot remember or process the emotions associated with their trauma. In Mary's case, although she was able to remember some of the details of her neglect, she was unable to recall how scared and helpless she felt. In other words, we repeat the tragedy we cannot remember. Gradually in therapy, Mary was able to recall these intense negative emotions she felt as a child from neglect. In doing so, she began to see how her current parenting style may not adequately care for her baby. Only then did Mary start taking concrete steps to change her parenting style. Freiburg stated succinctly, "Only when the mother's cries are heard will she hear her child's cries." In essence, Freiburg made an essential implication that our experience in early years lays the groundwork for how we love, bond, and care for our children. This statement is supported by developmental neuroscience. The human brain reaches 90% of its size within the first 4 years of life. During that crucial time, through our parents' care and attention, our brains begin to lay the foundation for a reward circuitry for relationships and love. In response to receiving love, we learn to appreciate the pleasure of giving love and caring for others. In other words, to give love, we need to know love first. Thus, our parenting instincts were crafted way before we became parents. This critical point of intergenerational transmission of love and trauma embedded in the article Ghosts in the Nursery becomes foundational in understanding infant mental health. The concept further underscores that parents and infants' mental health are inextricably linked to one another. Therefore, if we wish to improve children's mental well-being, we must also understand parents' stories and struggles.
Unprocessed childhood traumatic experiences with our parents may impact how we bond with our children. Not all meaning making is due to trauma, but we make meaning whether we've had a traumatic past or not. One of the quotes that I love that she says is, "Only when mother's cries are heard will she hear her child's cries." Now, I don't know everybody's role here in the Zoom room, but as home visitors, we are not clinicians. We are not therapists. So we are not doing what Selma Freiberg did in her study. But we are absolutely 100%. This entire home visiting program was created from this infant mental health lens. How we are with parents or caregivers helps them to be with their child in a different way. It's exactly what that statement means. What only when a mother's cries are heard will she hear her child's cries. So how do we hold space? How are we curious? How do we wonder with a parent or caregiver the meaning that they make of their child's behavior? I'm going back to something that Anna said a minute ago, potentially about modeling. We talked about this last time we met last week. Modeling is a great strategy until it's not a great strategy. Modeling can sometimes make a parent feel like you're better with their child than they are, which is not the intention of modeling, right? The intention of modeling is to show how it's done. I have had parents say to me, "You're so good with my child. I wish I could do it like you." When I was younger, that was great for my ego. But when I finally understood what they were saying is, "I'm not a good mom," using that strategy changed for me. So again, I'm wanting everybody to be working with caregivers from this place of curiosity and wonder around the meaning making. Because our attempts to help, our offering strategies may not be meeting them where they are. I use this example a lot. Some of you may have heard it before, which is not about trauma, but it is about us being able to ask questions so that we understand what parents are wanting, caregivers are wanting. During a home visit, a mom says to the home visitor, can you help me, give me some information around 2-year-olds and sleep? So the very diligent home visitor gathers information, developmentally appropriate information on sleep, and gives the information to the mom about sleep. And although doing her job or his job well, what they missed is that the reason why the mom wants to know about 2-year-old sleeping is because she wants the 2-year-old in the bed, her husband wants the 2-year-old out of the bed, and the mother-in-law is being judgmental about the mom wanting the baby in the bed. So our giving her developmental information about 2-year-olds and sleep has missed the question that was underneath the question she asked. Our jobs are very hard. And what's required is for us to operate from a place of curiosity so that we can actually attend to what the caregiver is wanting. It is, I'm not even gonna, I was gonna make up a percentage. I will say the majority of the time, the question they're asking you is not the question they want the answer to. There is something underneath that question.
Okay, that's
Any comments about that before
the concept of ghosts.
we shift gears? Maya, anything in the chat that?
No, I think we're good in the chat.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Okay. I'm going to keep moving forward. I just looked at the clock, so I'm going to keep going. Okay. I want to shift intensity for a moment. I feel like I need to take a deep breath because we were just talking about some intensity, and now I'm going to shift to something that feels important, but in a different way. If you were able to download the handouts, there were 2 handouts that were sent. One is the temperament continuum, and one was considering temperament booklet. And just to be clear, let's just make sure everybody's in agreement about the understanding about what temperament is. Temperament is basically how we roll. It's how we come into the world. We sort of approach the world a certain way. It's biological. It is not environmental. It's just how we roll. It is impacted sometimes by environment, but it's really more our tendencies. And so let's just take a quick look at this handout so that you can make some decisions if you want to use it or not. This temperament continuum talks about temperament traits, activity level, distractibility, intensity, and so on. And then what you do is you have the caregiver mark where they are on the continuum and where their child is. When I do work with pre-K, I actually have co-teachers do this for each other so that they can see where their temperaments are. For you as a provider, the ones I want to highlight are intensity, approach and withdrawal, and mood. Because those, not that those temperament traits are issues, but it could be issues in the dynamic. So if one of the duo, caregiver and child's intensity is not intense, and the other one is intense, there's the potential for them to, a caregiver to misread or not be able to attend to the temperamental need. If they have the same intensity, many of you have experienced this, maybe this is your own life, where it just explodes, right? It becomes very intense very quickly. I use this example all the time when I talk about temperament. It fits in the concept, for those of you who know about Winnicott's goodness of fit. We talk about in terms of parent and child, the goodness of fit. Temperament is a piece of that. I had a really good friend who, very smart human being, sort of laid back, easygoing, more flexible than I am, I will say. And she had a child, her oldest, who was not very flexible. Some people might say more rigid, more organized, and she wasn't. And so he came into her bedroom one weekend morning and said, "Mama, what's the plan for today?" And she said, "I don't know, maybe we'll have a play date with Jack, or maybe we'll go to the farmer's market, or I don't know, we'll go for a walk, or maybe we'll go to grandma's house." And he left her bedroom and went into his bedroom and flipped the bookcase. And what this mom was doing, who is one of my best friends, was she was trying to make her little boy more flexible than he was. But what was happening is she was not attuned. She was not meeting his needs. And so he was basically saying, "I asked you a question and you didn't answer it," and he lost his mind. He flipped his lid. Well-intended, smart, caring, loving mom was trying to change her child versus seeing who her child is or was and shifting accordingly. This is goodness of fit. In terms of temperament, it is the adult's responsibility to do the shifting. The other handout is one of my favorite activities. And it's called, there are 4 questions, and how you use it is you have the caregiver speak for the child. So for those of you who do that in your work anyway, this will not be a new concept, but it's a wonderful way of having a parent say what their child's temperament traits are based on that continuum. And B on the handout says, "Let me tell you what it's like to be me." So for my friend, her son would say things like, "Things are really scary when there isn't a plan. I feel overwhelmed when I don't know what's going to happen next." The next piece is, I don't like it when you don't answer my questions." And then it would help me if you would fill in the blank. It's a beautiful shift perspective activity for parents to be able to read their children's cues. You can do it at any age. It's a wonderful activity. So, as a professional, we are always of 2 minds when we are home visiting. We're watching our own responses, thoughts about what's in front of us, while we're also watching the parent-child relationship. This is a skill that builds with practice. This, in many ways, helps us to really live the parallel process. How do you notice your behavioral expectations and shift in the moment to be able to be with parents? Now, I know a number of you in the room, and I know a number of you have been doing this work for a long time, and Camarina spoke to it. It's like, at this point in time, I can do that. But how do you help a parent to be able to do that? Now, for those of you who say, "I do it all the time," I'm going to ask you to take note of this. This isn't a judgment. I think we think we're better than we are most of the time. And so in this discussion that we're having, I want you to watch yourself. Am I actually doing this in the way in which I think I am doing this? Is there a family that pushes my buttons more than others? Is there a family I'm working with that I have now told them 55 times what I think they should do versus asking questions? I'm going to give another quick example about this. In the therapeutic preschool that I worked in back east, I'm going to swear. I'm just going to warn you, I'm going to swear because this child swore in the story. And again, this is preschool, but we were a therapeutic program. We worked with families. I would talk to the families on my caseload every week. to talk about what was happening at home and school. And so this little boy said during snack one day, Mara, my mom thinks you're a pain in the ass. And thank you for laughing, everybody. And so as you can imagine, my buttons were a tad pushed, and I was thinking, I did not say thinking, well, I think your mom is a pain in the ass, right? Like that is the like of two minds, right? I'm noticing my reactions, but because I'm a clinician and I'm trained, I said, wow, that must have been really hard for you to hear that. I don't know. It was the best I could do in the moment, right? Was to say that. And I will tell you, I told the story many times and in different contexts, but at one point it hit me that his mom was right. His mom was right. And the reason why his mom was right is because I spent every week for 3 years trying to convince this mom to see her child the way I saw him. I was not asking questions. I was not trying to see what she wanted. He, from my lens, was one of the most disturbed kids I had ever worked with. And she didn't see that. And I was trying to convince her of it. I mean, I will just, in my defense, I was young. I just want to say that. I was young and new. I would do it differently, I hope now. But it's a good experience for me to have had, because I know I don't believe people when they say I've never done it wrong. Because we are human. And because of that experience, I now do things differently. And so are there families you're working with where you are pushing and they're not receiving? And can you be vulnerable enough to say, wow, I am missing the mark here? We need to ask ourselves, what is the behavior telling us? What is the need that is unmet? And why am I so reactive to this? I was so reactive to that mom. I was so reactive to that mom and was not, never helped her, never helped her. So now I just want you to think about some of the families you work with, and do you understand the meaning they make out of their children's behavior? And if not, how would you find out? What attributes or qualities or characteristics are caregivers giving to their child's behavior? How do you wonder with the caregiver about their perspective? What reflective questions can you ask to understand what's underneath their interpretation? Can you validate and encourage perspective shifting at the same time? And then how do you hold space when you're activated? I just asked like 75 million questions with like, okay, have a nice day. I'm just going to stop there and let's just open it up to see if there are some thoughts, comments, examples that you have that would be helpful to talk about. Again, if any of you are sitting here in the room going, yeah, I got this, I'm really good at this, I'm just going to ask you to double check. Because I think even when we think we're good, there's one place where we struggle. Like I teach reframing and shifting perspective for a living. And some of you have heard me say this. My mother just recently passed away, but she was mentally ill. And all I had to do was walk into the room and her say, "Good morning, Mara," and I would flip my lid, like immediately, right? I do this for a living and I couldn't do it very well with her. Oh, sorry, I saw some hands up. And I pushed the wrong button. Chantel and then Anna.
My example, I guess, is just a little bit different because my child's autistic. And he's on the milder end of the spectrum, but it was a major shift because I never experienced anything like that in my family growing up. So But going back to your story about Jake, you know, I realized that my parenting, especially my discipline, was a lot of that ghost regimen that my mom had done. The independency, you know, being raised by an independent woman like that. And so a lot of it was like, well, you got to learn how to do it. You got to learn how to do it. You got to do it. And then eventually it shifted like, no, you know, he's autistic. It's different for him. His learning style is different. And I have to be the one to adjust. So now what works for me is sometimes I get home from work and I don't even change until I'm going to bed because it's mom this, mom that, and we're doing homework. You know, it's something consistent. And what works for me is just shutting off everything, like phone, TV, and we're just sitting there and we're doing homework and I'm being present, and that kind of works a lot better for me, you know, without the distractions, the limited, you know, just music and just being present in that moment, because at that time he's asking for that, you know, he's asking for engagement. He's asking for, I need your time because I didn't get that all day and have so many things going on in my brain. So I just kind of, you know, that made me think about that.
Beautiful. And Chantel, what you're describing is like whether a child has autism or not, they are still communicating with their behavior, right? Like that's the universal piece, right? This is not different depending on the issue. It is, I need to understand what this means, but if you don't have that lens, it's hard to understand it, right? It's not how I understand behavior. And what's required is for us to find out what the unmet need is, which Chantel is exactly what you did, is that his unmet need was connection. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. So it's implementing that now, knowing what I know into this new family that I have. You know,
beautiful.
I have a 2-year-old who has a temper tantrums, or so mom says, so mom labels. So now it's working that.
Yes. And so I love it. You said has temper tantrums, so mom says, right? But it's like so mom interprets, right? It is how she sees it, right? This isn't a whether it's right or wrong. This is how she sees it. And so how do we sit with them and wonder, well, so what do you think your child is telling you when they do that? What makes you think that's what they're telling you, right? We're doing both at the same time. Actually, we're now of three minds, right? We're trying to understand what the child is telling us. We're trying to hold space for the interpretation of the parent or caregiver. And we have our own, like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm having this conversation again with this mom. This is the 15th time we've had this conversation, right? So all of that is happening at the same time. Yeah. Anna?
Yeah, it's kind of like it's like three lenses, right? Three filters. What is the child saying, the parent saying, our own perspective.
What's happening in here?
You know, one of the things that I have noticed, you know, during with home visiting, and this is for me when I feel like my buttons are being pushed in, you know, in a home visit. I noticed myself perhaps giving the client like more information or kind of trying to perhaps make them see or make them accept, or you know, to kind of like shift but do you see what I'm like, do you see what I'm seeing?
Right.
And then for me, that's when, you know, it's like being, you know, having that self-awareness of like, wait a minute, why am I being so pushy with this family? You know, why am I being triggered? What's triggering me? You know, so I mean, in that moment, sometimes it's just the validation of like, why am I being so pushy? And then that's for me a way to step back and then listen to the client and then bring that up to my reflective supervision with my supervisor and say, hey, I notice myself doing this, and then I can have my own time of exploring it. But sometimes just something's very significant has just a validation of like, oh, here I am, check me out moment, right?
Yes,
absolutely.
And so that's what's required, right? I mean, wherever all of us are in this process is where our work is, right? I mean, so if you're in a place of like, oh, I never get triggered in a home visit, I'm be like, well, I'd like to be like you. But if you're never triggered in a home visit, I want you to just notice, really? Is that true? And that may in fact be true. But I really want that question to be asked a couple times. Now, trigger does not mean you need to flip your lid. Trigger just might mean, like Anna's describing, like, I'm pushing my opinion here. Well, that's interesting. That's not usually how I roll, right? So what's required is noticing it first. The figuring it out in the moment is not what's required. What's required for us in the moment is like, what do I need to do to shift to be able to be more curious with this family? I'll be curious about my behavior when I have my supervisor. Yeah. Yeah, good.
Here's another iteration of that I want to read from the chat. Veronica says, home visiting is just challenging because every client activates us in different ways. We do have two minds going on when visiting families, really reflecting around the question, what does my client want for their children? Not what do I think is right or wrong.
Oh my gosh, right? Now, beautifully said, and I think hard to implement, right? Like, I know people are like, oh, you just build a relationship and you just follow their lead. It's like, if it was that easy, we would not be having trainings about this, right? I mean, for some of us, it does come easier than others, but the truth is it's challenging being a human being because we have opinions and thoughts and feelings. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Maya, is there more in the chat? Okay. Okay, where are people at this point in time, in these last few minutes of our time together? Questions, thoughts, comments? Pieces that were helpful, pieces that were validating, pieces that you're going to contemplate with your staff, with your colleagues, with your families?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's like, I have families with challenging behaviors. And so a lot of families that I'm working with where they do have the experiences like in that video from the ghost in the nursery, and they've been honest and open about it, sharing of what they've gone through, very similar to that video. And so sometimes when I do go into that exploratory or like being curious, what do you think your child is what are your child's needs right now, or what is it that your child's communicating? Then I get the response of, oh, they just want that toy and I just don't want that. And so it's kind of like I'm figuring out how to explore a little bit more away from that.
Yeah. So I think that is really common, right? I mean, and I think that's the work where the relationship is important. And I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I wonder if you could say something like, is it possible that the behavior might mean something else in addition to that?
Okay.
Right? I mean, because the work is to expand people's perspectives, right? Like when people stay stuck in this is what it is, that is 100% from their previous experience. And so is it possible, comfortable, doable to say, ask that question? Is it possible that it could be something else? And if the answer is no, he's just a spoiled brat, then how do you follow their lead for a while? Right? It's like, how do I come in the door in another direction?
Yeah.
Because I don't want you to get in a situation where it's like, but no, it doesn't mean that, which is not what you were doing, right? Because you want to stay in connection. But how do you, shifting perspective is literally about opening somebody's mind, right? And so is it possible that it could be something else besides that? Lizbeth, what do you think?
I like that.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I'm going to tell you, there's no guarantee that's the right thing to do, but that's where I'm curious, right?
Okay.
That's where I might go. Yeah.
Okay,
Elsa?
thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So, Mar, I was just gonna say, how do we deal with parents that are going through divorce and there's different ways that they're parenting? And so sometimes we have several that some of them want to do visits together. Sometimes they're wanting to do them separately, but they're kind of trying to get us on each of their teams. And so it's a little bit different because it feels like sometimes it's neither one of them are listening to what we're trying to say, you know, and so that can be very difficult for our staff too.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's very common also, Elsa. And I don't have any idea what the regulations are, the rules are, Elsa, in FIT. But I would say in home visiting, I would say to have those parents have separate home visitors and have so that the provider doesn't get in the middle, right? And so if I'm just with this parent, I can help that parent read baby's cues. And if I'm with this parent, I can help this parent. And if they say, but my husband or but my ex-wife, and say, wow, that must be really challenging. How do you think that impacts your ability to read your child's cues? Right? Like you keep bringing it back. When they're together, when there's tension, Elsa, it's just hard. If the tension isn't there and they're really it's an amicable separation and they're really wanting to meet their child's needs, it's fine to have one provider, I think. But I think because of that intensity, I don't know, can you do that in FIT? Can you have two providers?
That I'm not sure. We've always just done one, just for the sake because it's one child, and so typically we're putting it for the child and meeting them wherever they're at, whether it's at grandma's or whether it's at dad's or mom's, you know.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, I mean, I can definitely find out for sure. And if that's something that we have to do, we will, but.
Well, it's just worth thinking about, Elsa. I don't know necessarily if it's the right thing. I think it just gets the provider out of the middle.
Yes.
And that might not be doable.
And so I definitely have talked to both of them and said, you know, we are like the neutral party. We want to just make sure that we're here to help you and support him or her, and really want to be trying to make sure that we're not getting in the middle of any of the situation that's happening, you know.
Yes, you keep just naming your role, right? The scope of your role. Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Mara, a question from the chat.
Yes.
Jessica says, what is the need of a child who does not listen that we must repeat over and over again to stop a behavior or to do something, and he or she does not listen to us? How can we help them? And then adjacent to that, the continuation of her question is, and how to help parents to listen to them. Many times children listen to us and not to their parents.
Yeah. So I don't, this is my very, like with 2 minutes left to go, answer to this is that I think people put pathology to some very typical stuff. Like a child not wanting to listen isn't, unless there's a hearing issue, I think means I don't want to do what you're asking me to do. That's kind of what it is, right? And so if you can interpret the behaviors, like I'm telling him to stop playing and he isn't listening to me, I think he's saying, I want to keep playing, right? So I don't know if, Maya, the example is challenging behavior or typical behavior, right? Like if there's biting or hitting or throwing, like it needs to stop, right, for safety. But if a child is not listening because I've said clean up and they're not cleaning up, then I would help a parent say, understand they're having fun. So how can you set the limit differently? How can you help them know it's time to stop and you understand that stopping is hard? And if you understand what the behavior is telling you, right, it goes back to something Anna said, you just validate. You just validate. Right? This is hard. I know you don't want to. I know you're having fun and it's time for. Will things change miraculously? Absolutely not. But it is in the right direction. And I think, Maya, I think you said that the child listens to the providers, but not to the parents. So the child has the capacity, right? So this is not about a child not being able to do it. It is really about like, I just don't want to listen to you right now because I prefer to do something else. That was my 2-minute response to a question that we could literally spend like an hour on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. we are in wrapping up mode. Is there anything else anybody needs before we close?
I just want to say thank you. I know myself and a few team members are here. I didn't talk a lot, and that's a good thing. That means my head spinning. I'm learning a lot. I took notes, but the ghost in the nursery was something very new to me that I'm really going to
Good.
process. So thank you so much.
Yeah, good to see you, Ruby.
Anna also says, thank you, Mara. Always grateful for you and your shared wisdom. My takeaway was ghosts in the nursery and the quotes. We repeat the tragedy we cannot remember. And when the parents' cries are heard, their babies' cries are also heard. So that impacted a lot of people. Great information. Thank you so much. Lots and lots and lots of thanks in here, Mara, for sharing all your wisdom.
My pleasure. Always a delight to be with you all. As I started this off, I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. So I'm glad it was helpful. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to be here. Nice to see some familiar faces and some familiar names. And I'm good. Maya, anything you need to do before we close?
Yeah. I'll thank you all so much for being here, and Mara as well. Lots of people are asking about whether we will be having more trainings. We do plan to have one more in the spring, and so we will be sure that you are all on our mailing list and get that information. And I'm glad that so many people are asking, because it's great that we can all come together and have this kind of conversation and learn. People are also asking if the recording will be available. Yes, it will be up on our YouTube channel probably by next week. Won't be immediately, but here is the link to the YouTube channel. There's some other home visitor directed videos that are up there from our last symposium. So you can check that out there. And yeah, by next week, we will also have the certificates sent out. If you don't get that by the end of next week, then you can check in with us. Please don't check in tomorrow. We will not have them ready yet. And people are still saying, thank you so much. This is a great webinar. I got so much out of this.
I'm glad. Good.
Yeah. So great. I'm glad. That's wonderful. Thank you, Mara.
You're welcome. All right, everybody have a good afternoon.
I guess it's over. Are we done? Yeah, she said bye already. Okay. So just press this.
Yes.